At Dave's barbecue, Clara laughed a little too long at some new guy's joke, her hand lingering on his arm. I watched from the grill, turning burgers, feeling the grease pop, then I heard her, clear as a bell. Ethan and I, we're just exploring new dynamics, you know, expanding our horizons. She met my gaze across the yard, a cold, challenging glint in her eyes, before turning back to him, a smile playing on her lips. Sometimes, she added, you just need more. The Sunday morning sun pushed weak light through the kitchen window, just enough to catch the dust motes dancing over the worn wooden floor. I sat at the table with my coffee, scanning the local news headlines on my tablet. The smell of the brewing pot still hung in the air. Clara came into the doorway, twisting her wedding ring. A small movement I noticed even before she spoke. Her voice held an odd mix of excitement and nervousness, like a child about to share a secret they knew was trouble. Can we talk about something? She asked, her gaze flicking between my face and the coffee maker. I lowered the tablet, sensing the shift. Sundays were usually quiet. She walked over to the living room, perched on the edge of the coffee table, her back to me, avoiding my eyes. A slight tremor ran through her hands as she finally turned. I think we should try an open marriage, she said, the words coming out fast, almost a rush. The coffee mug paused halfway to my lips. I choked, a hot sputter catching in my throat. My eyes watered. Sorry, what? I managed, wiping my mouth with the back of my hand. Clara leaned forward, her voice gaining a strange confidence, a rehearsed quality. Where we are still committed to each other, you know. Still a couple. But we are also free to explore other options. I slammed my mug down on the table, the ceramic clatter echoing in the sudden silence. Disbelief wrestled with a cold anger. Are you out of your mind? I demanded. 7 happy years we've had, Clara. She reached out to touch my knee, her fingers brushing my jeans. I jerked away, pulling my leg back. She lowered her hand, her expression softening. I love you, Ethan. I really do. This could just spice things up for us. I stood up, pacing the small living room rug, my voice rising with each step. Spice things up by sleeping with other people? How is that supposed to make us stronger? Clara followed me with her eyes. It's about freedom, Ethan. Exploration. Not just sex. Don't you ever wonder what it would be like to? I snapped, cutting her off. No, I do not wonder what it's like to cheat on my wife. My voice was sharp now. Where is this even coming from, Clara? She sat back, defensive. It's not cheating if we both agree to it. I've been reading things, talking to some people. I laughed, a harsh, bitter sound. Right. Because nothing says, I love you like screwing other people. Clara's eyes flashed, a spark of anger returning to her face. Don't patronize me, Ethan. This is a real thing. Other couples do this. We're not other couples, I shouted, the words tearing through the quiet house. I can't believe you would even suggest this. What about us? Do you not love me anymore? Her face crumpled then. Tears welled in her eyes. Of course I love you, Ethan. That's why I'm bringing this up with you instead of just doing it. The words hit me like a punch to the gut. Instead of just doing it? I asked, my voice barely a whisper. You've got someone lined up already, don't you? Her silence was the answer. It hung in the air, heavy and damning, confirming every fear I hadn't even known I had. I collapsed onto the couch, burying my face in my hands. The room spun. Who is it? I whispered, the question muffled. She mumbled something about nobody specific, just a general feeling of restlessness. Like she had missed out on things. I pulled my hands away, standing again, the ultimatum forming on my tongue. If you want to be free, Clara, be my guest. But if you do this, if you ever act on this, it will be the last thing you ever do in this marriage. I mean that. Clara's eyes widened, pleading, her tears now falling freely. Ethan, please don't be like that. This isn't an ultimatum, it's a conversation. There's nothing honest about wanting to screw other people while pretending to be committed to your husband, I said, my voice cold and flat. You're not even trying to understand, she argued, swiping at her cheeks. You're right, I'm not, I retorted. Because where you're coming from is insane. Our vows, I started. We stood up in front of everyone, swore to each other. People change, Ethan, she interrupted. Relationships evolve. I threw my hands up in exasperation. Oh, I'm sorry. I didn't realize being faithful made me close-minded. Clara moved closer, trying to soften her voice. It's about opening our minds to new experiences together. It could bring us closer. I shook my head, disbelief settling in my bones. How does sleeping with other people bring us closer, Clara? Explain that to me. It's about trust, she insisted. Choosing each other even when we have other options. I stared at her. Your husband isn't enough for you anymore? Her expression softened further, a flicker of genuine sadness in her eyes. Of course you're enough, Ethan. It's about expanding horizons. The thought made my stomach churn. So, we'd compare notes on our affairs? Is that the new horizon? Clara stepped back, her shoulders slumping. It doesn't have to be just about sex, Ethan. It could be about emotional connections, new experiences. I cut her off, my voice sharp. Oh, that's so much better. You want to form emotional connections with other men? She was exasperated. Will you at least consider it? My voice dropped, the anger replaced by a chilling finality. No, Clara. I can't consider it. The moment you sleep with another man, we are done. Over. Finished. Do you understand me? Her face crumpled completely, fresh tears streaming. Ethan! Please don't say that. Congratulations, I spat, the words bitter. You shared your feelings. Now I'm sharing mine. This is a deal-breaker. She sank onto the couch, her body shaking. I can't believe you're being so rigid. Don't you trust me? I laughed, a harsh, humorless sound. Trust you? You're asking me if I trust you, while simultaneously telling me you want to sleep with other people? She pleaded. Just think about it. Don't decide now. I grabbed my keys from the hook by the door. There's nothing to consider, Clara. You want an open marriage? Fine. But it will be the last thing you do as my wife. I need some air. I stormed out, the door slamming shut behind me, the sound rattling through the quiet Sunday street. I got into my truck, the engine kicking over with a familiar roar, and drove. My mind was a whirlwind of anger, hurt, and disbelief. I replayed the conversation, her words echoing in my ears, wondering how Clara, my high school sweetheart, the woman I married, could want this. I drove aimlessly, watching the late afternoon sun dip toward the horizon, painting the sky in fading oranges and purples. I found myself outside Gus's place, our favorite bar, the spot where we had our first date, where I proposed, where we celebrated countless milestones. The neon sign buzzed faintly in the dimming light. I walked inside. Gus, the bartender, was wiping down the counter, his usual steady rhythm. He looked up, his brow furrowing slightly. Rough day, Ethan? He asked, already reaching for a glass. I managed a humorless laugh. You could say that, Gus. Give me a double, would you? He raised an eyebrow as he poured. Woman troubles? I knocked back half the whiskey in one go, the burn spreading through my chest. You could say that too. Gus leaned on the bar, his arms crossed. Want to talk about it? I stared into the amber liquid, swirling the ice. Clara wants an open marriage. Gus let out a low whistle, a sound of genuine surprise. Didn't see that coming. You two always seemed rock solid. I finished the drink, the glass thudding softly on the counter. Yeah. Well, apparently not solid enough. I told him Clara thought it would make us stronger. Gus nodded, sympathetic. That's rough, man. What are you gonna do? I stared into my empty glass, the answer feeling like a heavy stone in my gut. I told her it's a deal breaker. If she does it, we're done. Gus nodded slowly. That's fair. You got to stand your ground on something like that. I took another long swig of the second drink he'd poured, the ice clinking softly. Yeah. But what if she does it anyway? What if I lose her, Gus? Gus placed a hand on my shoulder, a firm, reassuring weight. "Then you'll pick yourself up and move on, Ethan. You're a good guy. You deserve someone who wants the same things you do." I nodded, unable to speak, as we sat in companionable silence, the dim light of the bar softening the edges of the harsh world outside. The days after our Sunday morning conversation stretched into a strange, strained silence. Clara moved through the house with a new distance, her thoughts clearly elsewhere. She'd hum quietly to herself while washing dishes or preparing a meal. A small, private tune I couldn't quite place. I felt a growing dread, a cold knot tightening in my stomach that made even the simplest tasks feel heavy. I tried to talk to her again one evening. We were in the living room, the TV playing some muted drama. I kept my voice calm, lower than that Sunday, appealing to the 7 years we'd built together, the promises we made. "Clara," I started. "We swore those vows for a reason. Everything we have, everything we are, it's tied to that." She listened, nodding occasionally, but her gaze was fixed somewhere beyond me, on the wall, or perhaps through it. Her resolve remained, a quiet, stubborn current beneath her polite demeanor. She spoke of personal growth and needs that couldn't be met within the confines of a traditional marriage, words that sounded alien coming from her lips, as if memorized from a pamphlet. I started noticing small things. Her phone became an extension of her hand, always present, often vibrating with notifications she'd quickly check with a small, private smile. There was a new lightness in her step sometimes, a little bounce as she walked, especially when she was getting ready to leave the house. It was a lightness I hadn't seen in years. A carefree energy that felt entirely alien to our shared life. It made my stomach clench. One Tuesday, she came home well after 11. "Where were you?" I asked, my voice flat, trying to sound casual, but the effort felt like a lie. "Just with friends," she said, shrugging, not meeting my eyes as she walked past me into the kitchen, catching up. The explanation felt vague, a thin veil over something else. A gut feeling began to gnaw at me, a persistent, cold awareness that something was wrong, deeply wrong. I started to pick up on other small changes, a faint, unfamiliar scent on her clothes some evenings, a kind of sweet, floral musk that wasn't her usual perfume. Once, I saw an unlisted number flash on her call history before she quickly cleared it. My mind drifted back to our argument, to her words. Instead of just doing it, and the chilling silence that had followed my question about someone already lined up, the memory felt like a physical blow. I found myself back at Gus's place more often. He'd just nod as I slid onto the stool, pouring my usual double without a word. "She's different, Gus," I told him one night, swirling the whiskey in my glass. "Like she's already halfway out the door." Gus leaned on the bar, cleaning a glass with a practiced motion. "Sometimes, Ethan, a person makes up their mind before they even say a word. You just gotta brace yourself for what comes next." His advice was practical, grim, about preparing for the worst. Back at home, I started searching for signs, a desperate act from a man losing control of his own reality. My eyes scanned for clues, my ears strained for whispers. It was a humiliating process, but I couldn't stop. I felt like an investigator in my own life, trying to piece together a crime before it was fully committed. Then, one Thursday, I caught her in a lie. She said she was going to Sarah's book club. Later that night, Sarah called, asking if Clara was with me, because she hadn't shown up. The discrepancy was small, a missed book club meeting, but it felt monumental, a crack in the foundation I couldn't ignore. When I asked her about it, she just said, "Oh, it got canceled. I went to run errands instead." Her voice was too even, too quick. The tension in our house became palpable, a thick, suffocating blanket of unspoken truths that pressed down on us. We ate dinners in near silence, the clinking of forks on plates loud in the quiet. I felt isolated, questioning everything I thought I knew about our marriage, about Clara, about the life we had carefully constructed. Every shared memory, every inside joke, felt tainted, viewed through this new, dark lens. I spent more nights at the bar, finding a strange solace in Gus's quiet company and the numbing effect of the whiskey. It was easier to sit there, listening to the muffled conversations of strangers, than to face the silence of my own home. One evening, after I'd returned from the bar, Clara found me in the kitchen, pouring myself a glass of water. She stood across from me, her arms crossed, her voice softer than it had been in days. "I'm sorry I hurt you, Ethan," she said, her eyes a little red, as if she'd been crying earlier. It was an apology for the pain, I realized, but not for the desire itself, not for the path she was determined to take. I felt the chasm between us widening with every word, every silence, sensing the inevitable, final step Clara was about to take, pulling us apart, leaving me stranded on my side of the cliff. I walked into the kitchen after work, the familiar scent of simmering dinner a small comfort. Clara usually had her phone glued to her hand, but today, it lay face up on the counter, next to a grocery list. Its screen was unlocked, glowing faintly. A text message notification popped up, its sender's name clear. Darren. My heart pounded, a sudden, heavy drum against my ribs. The abstract dread, the vague suspicion I'd been living with for weeks, coalesced into a concrete name, a tangible betrayal. Darren. I recognized the name. Clara had mentioned him a few weeks back. A new colleague at her office. Something I'd dismissed as insignificant at the time. Just a new guy on the team, she'd said, offhand. Now, his name on her screen, the words he'd sent, "Can't stop thinking about our talk, Clara." Felt like we solved the world's problems over those lattes, painted a different picture. It wasn't explicit, but it was undeniably intimate. The tone, the shared understanding, the casual familiarity, it was a tone she no longer used with me. I scrolled up a little, seeing fragments of a burgeoning emotional connection, inside jokes, and shared excitements that carved a deeper wound than any physical act. A cold fury began to replace the hurt I'd felt. The emotional connection she had spoken of, the one she'd wanted to explore, now had a face, a name, and a history with another man. The pieces of our recent conversations clicked into place, sharp and painful. Her pleas for understanding hadn't been an invitation to a discussion about our marriage. They had been a smokescreen for an already established bond, a demand for permission for something she was already doing. I placed the phone back on the counter, carefully, as if it were a fragile bomb. I waited. The silence in the house amplified the white-hot rage simmering beneath my skin. Each tick of the kitchen clock felt like a hammer blow, marking the slow passage of time until she would walk through that door. When the garage door finally rumbled open and her key turned in the lock, I was standing in the living room, arms crossed, staring out the front window. She walked in, her usual bright demeanor faltering the moment she saw my rigid posture, my face. The light in her eyes died. She knew. I turned to her, my voice unnervingly calm, cutting through the heavy air. "So, Clara," I began, my voice flat, holding up her phone, which I'd retrieved. "Care to tell me about your talks with Darren?" I recited the damning words I'd read, each one a fresh stab in my chest. "Solving the world's problems over lattes. Were you?" Clara's face drained of color, the sudden pallor stark against her pale skin. She stammered, denying the full extent, trying to minimize it. "Ethan. We're just talking. He's a new colleague. We were discussing work things, and then, I didn't budge, my stare unwavering. Just talking, Clara? Is that what you call planning clandestine meetings? Sharing intimate thoughts you don't share with your husband?" She broke then, her shoulders slumping. "Okay, Ethan. Yes. We've developed a connection, an emotional connection. But that's all. It hasn't gone all the way." I swear. She avoided my gaze, looking at the floor, at her hands, anywhere but me. My trust, already frayed and thin, shattered completely. The lie, the deceit, felt as damaging, perhaps more so, than the physical act itself. The carefully constructed facade of our marriage crumbled into dust at my feet. "It doesn't matter, Clara," I said, my voice hollow, empty. "You've already broken our vows. Emotional connection, clandestine meetings. It's all the same. You've broken them." She looked up, tears streaming down her face now, begging, "Please, Ethan, please forgive me. I'll end it. I swear I will. I see how much I've hurt you." She reached for me, her hands outstretched. I felt nothing but a hollow emptiness, a bitter realization settling deep within me. Her repentance, her sorrow, only came with the undeniable evidence of being caught. Not before, not when she first started exploring her options. Clara, after her admission, tried to fix things. She moved around the house with a nervous energy, suggesting we clear the air, as if the raw confession had somehow evaporated the damage. "Maybe we should try therapy, Ethan," she said one evening, over plates of lukewarm casserole. It was a casual invitation to mend something she'd already broken, an attempt to sweep the shattered pieces under a rug. I went along with it, nodding, agreeing that it might be a good idea. My mind, however, was already elsewhere, meticulously planning, calculating. Outwardly, I was agreeable, a mask of compliance. But internally, a cold, unyielding resolve had settled in. I wouldn't be the only one to pay the price for this. If our marriage was going to end, it would be on my terms, or at least, on terms I could live with. I started documenting everything. I went back through my phone, taking screenshots of the unsettling texts and call logs I'd seen. I made a mental note of dates and times, small observations of her unexplained absences or vague excuses. It was a methodical approach to a chaotic reality, building a quiet, indisputable record of her deception. Discreetly, during a long lunch break I took from work, I consulted a divorce lawyer. His office was sterile, the air thick with the scent of old paper and desperation. He was a middle-aged man with tired eyes and a patient voice. He spoke about rights, about community property, about potential outcomes. I listened, absorbing every word, understanding the intricate legal landscape that was becoming my future. I began to make small, strategic changes in my routine. I'd hint to Clara that I was working late more often, or out with Gus. These were half-truths, covers for my meetings with the lawyer, or simply for the time I spent alone, thinking. I was creating a new narrative for my time, one that wouldn't necessarily involve her. I considered my own options for freedom, but not in the way Clara had imagined. My freedom wouldn't be about exploring new emotional or physical connections. It would be about disentangling, about survival, about rebuilding a life she had systematically dismantled. It was a freedom born of necessity, not desire. Gus noticed a change in me. "You're a lot quieter these days, Ethan," he observed one night, pushing a fresh beer across the polished bar. "Got a bit of a hard edge to you." Beneath all the weariness, I just nodded, taking a long swig. He didn't press, just poured another. I started to subtly withdraw financially. I'd always managed our joint accounts, a task Clara happily left to me. Now, I quietly set up a separate account, transferring small, regular amounts from my paychecks. I consulted with the lawyer again about safeguarding my assets, learning about what I could and couldn't do. Brick by brick, I was building a wall, preparing for the inevitable. I let Clara believe she had successfully navigated the crisis, that her apology and vague promises had smoothed things over. I watched her carefully. She seemed relieved, interpreting my quiet compliance as a form of acceptance. It gave her a false sense of security, a dangerous illusion that she could control the damage she'd caused. My thoughts often drifted to Darren, the man who had so casually stepped into the sacred space of my marriage. It wasn't just the betrayal of Clara, but the audacity of him, the thought of their shared jokes, their quiet lattes. It fueled a different kind of pain, a cold, specific resolve to make sure that whatever future Clara envisioned for herself, it wouldn't be without consequence. I knew then that I needed to regain control, not just for my future, but to reclaim my dignity, piece by piece. The emotional storm had passed, replaced by a strange, detached calm. It was time for strategic thinking. Clara, seemingly relieved by my apparent acceptance, began to revert to her earlier restless demeanor. She still kept her phone close, checked it with a furtive glance, but she was more cautious, a new, subtle layer of guardedness in her movements. She thought she was safe. She was wrong. I started to weave a subtle narrative among our shared friends and family. It wasn't about explicit accusations or harsh truths. Not yet. It was about planting seeds, letting the rich soil of gossip and speculation do its own work. When asked how Clara was, or how we were, I'd sigh, a slow, heavy sound, and speak of her newfound desire for freedom. I'd mention how she wanted to explore herself and how that had led to a strained period for us, a difficult time. My voice was always low, tinged with a carefully crafted hurt, never anger. It didn't take long for the subtle shifts to begin. Clara started to feel a chill from some of our friends, especially the women in our circle. A brief, almost imperceptible hesitation before a hug, a smile that didn't quite reach their eyes, conversations that felt shorter, less intimate. I heard whispers, too, when Clara would step away from a group, hushed tones that ceased abruptly when she returned. Even Darren, I learned through a mutual acquaintance who worked in the same building as him, began to experience some unintended consequences. The news of Clara's open marriage proposition, twisted and embellished by the ever-eager grapevine, had reached his circle. He was being viewed differently, I was told, with a mixture of curiosity and quiet disapproval. This was a Midwestern community, after all. Such ideas didn't sit well. I never directly outed Clara or Darren. Instead, I made sure certain conversations, laden with vague but telling details, happened in places where they could be overheard by mutual acquaintances. At the grocery store, I might mention to a neighbor, a little too loudly, how Clara was finding her true self, and how some of her new friends were helping her with that journey. At church, I might tell a kindly old woman that Clara was struggling with her commitment issues, a quiet confession designed to echo far and wide. The small-town grapevine began to hum, as it always does, slowly piecing together the bits of information I had so carefully dropped. It was like watching a slow-motion car crash, where I was both the driver and the audience. Clara, predictably, became increasingly paranoid. "Why are people looking at me funny, Ethan?" she asked one evening, her voice tight, her eyes scanning the room as if expecting to find spies in the corners. Sarah practically froze me out at the PTA meeting. I maintained an innocent, hurt expression, my voice soft. "Honey, people are just reacting to our marital issues. And, well, your unusual ideas." I paused, letting the implication hang. People talk, you know, especially in a small town. They always have. The pressure mounted on Clara. Her carefully constructed facade, the one she'd used to justify her needs and growth, began to crack under the weight of public scrutiny. She was accustomed to being liked, to being seen as the sweet, dependable Clara. This new perception, this quiet judgment, was a foreign concept to her. "You're spreading rumors about me, aren't you?" she accused one night, her voice trembling with a mix of fear and anger. I looked at her, calmly, my eyes holding a practiced sorrow. "Clara, I haven't said anything untrue. And the truth," I added, my voice barely a whisper, "has a way of coming out on its own, doesn't it?" I also ensured that key information about Darren was accidentally revealed. A mention of his workplace, in a conversation about Clara's restlessness with a mutual friend who had connections to his industry. A casual comment about how he lived on the other side of town, painting a picture of deliberate secrecy. The price began to manifest not just in the strained silence of our home, but in the subtle chill from the community. For both Clara and Darren, she started to feel the heavy weight of social judgment, the quiet disapproval that permeated every interaction. The unsaid words, the knowing glances, the averted eyes, they were all consequences of her choices. It's a strange thing, watching your life unfold, seeing the choices made, the paths taken. Stick around to the end to see how life's costly choices unfold. Clara's professional life, which had always been a source of quiet pride for her, began to suffer subtly. She worked in public relations for a local nonprofit, a community-facing role that relied heavily on trust and reputation. A few events she was organizing saw lower attendance than expected, and a couple of grant applications she spearheaded were unexpectedly denied. The whispers, I knew, had reached the board members, the local benefactors. Her usually bright, confident demeanor at work started to fray. Then, the call came. It was a Tuesday afternoon, my phone vibrating with an unfamiliar number. "Ethan?" A woman's voice, sharp and trembling with fury. asked without preamble. "My name is Sarah. I'm Darren's wife, and I think we need to talk about Clara." The breath caught in my throat. This was it, the third-party confrontation that dragged Clara's affair into undeniable, public light. Sarah didn't mince words. She had heard enough from friends, seen enough quiet glances, and now, she had found her own evidence. Her voice was a raw symphony of hurt and anger, demanding answers, demanding consequences. I listened, offered what little I could, confirming enough to solidify her fears, without betraying my own carefully constructed defense. I used that call as my final, decisive leverage. When Clara came home that evening, her face pale, her shoulders slumped from the day's subtle rebuffs, I was waiting. I didn't shout. I didn't rage. My voice was calm, cutting, the words precise. "We need to talk," I said, my gaze unwavering. For the last time, she sank onto the couch, already sensing the shift. "The end. The choice is yours, Clara," I began, my voice flat, almost emotionless. "You leave this marriage on my terms, or I will pursue full legal action, detailing every betrayal." I watched her face. Every text, every late night, every financial maneuver you thought I missed, and yes, every detail of Darren. I laid out the evidence on the coffee table. Printouts of the texts I'd screenshot. A meticulously kept log of her unexplained absences and vague excuses. Even some bank statements showing the small, almost imperceptible withdrawals she'd made from our joint account for her explorations. I included my lawyer's assessment, a detailed outline of what a contested divorce would entail for her, the public exposure, the financial consequences. Clara stared at the documents, her eyes wide, moving from one piece of paper to the next, her jaw slack. She finally realized the full extent of my quiet, methodical counterplay. She saw the walls closing in, the trap she'd unwittingly helped me set, the casual, almost flippant way she'd proposed an open marriage, the naive belief that she could have her cake and eat it too, crumbled before her eyes. She broke down completely. Her shoulders shook, and a deep, guttural sob ripped from her throat. She crumpled onto the floor, recognizing the profound depth of her miscalculation and the irreversible damage she had caused. "Ethan," she choked out, "please. I'm so sorry. I didn't think." I remained cold, detached. My face, I knew, showed the profound weariness of a man who had grieved his marriage long ago, who had already buried the Clara he thought he knew. There was no joy in this, only a grim satisfaction that I wouldn't be the sole casualty. "The choice is yours," I reiterated, my voice steady. "But the outcome for you will be far worse if you don't cooperate. Think about your reputation, Clara. Think about your career. Think about what Sarah just did for you." She looked up at me, her eyes bloodshot, her face streaked with tears. There was no fight left in her, no defiance. Seeing no other viable option, she finally nodded, a small jerky motion of her head. "Okay, Ethan," she whispered, her voice raw. "Your terms, just, please make it stop." The decision was made. The marriage, which had been long dead in spirit, was now officially laid to rest. I felt no triumph, only a profound sense of loss, and the bitter, metallic taste of a victory won at an immense personal cost. I immediately made arrangements for Clara to move out. The legal papers would follow, the formal process of separation. But in that moment, with her broken and defeated before me, I knew it was truly over. The divorce proceeded with a quiet, almost antiseptic efficiency. Clara, broken and resigned, offered little resistance. The papers were signed largely on my terms, a clean break that left her with significantly less than she might have fought for, had she possessed the will. Her silence in the lawyer's office, her eyes fixed on the distant wall, spoke volumes. She had faced her true pay-the-price moment, losing not just her marriage but her standing in the community. A heavy burden in a small town where reputations were currency. Darren, too, experienced significant fallout. I heard through the grapevine that his wife, Sarah, had left him. He lost his job shortly after, the company wanting to avoid any taint of scandal. His life, from what I gathered, unraveled like a loose thread on an old sweater. He moved away, his departure as quiet and swift as a thief in the night. I moved into a small apartment on the edge of town, a place with just enough room for me and my books. It was a new, solitary chapter, one I hadn't asked for, but was determined to write. The silence in the apartment was different from the strained quiet of the house with Clara. This silence was my own. A blank canvas, rather than a suffocating blanket. I found myself at Gus's bar more often in those early months, but now there was less anger, more quiet reflection. The whiskey still helped, but it was no longer numbing a fresh wound. It was simply easing the ache of remembrance. A slow, steady healing. Gus, ever the stoic observer, would just nod when I walked in, acknowledging my difficult journey and my quiet resolve without needing a single word. Slowly, I started rebuilding my life. I found strength in the everyday routines. Morning coffee, work, evening jogs along the river. A few trusted friends who stood by me without judgment, offering simple companionship, small comforts, steady rhythms. Occasionally, news of Clara would trickle back. She'd found a new job in a different city, a quiet departure from the town that had judged her. Her once vibrant spirit, the effervescent energy that had first drawn me to her, was, by all accounts, dulled. She was, I heard, alone. I reflected on the concept of freedom and exploration she had sought. It had led her to a lonely, bitter end, stripped of the very things she had once claimed to cherish. The irony was not lost on me, though it brought no satisfaction. Only a quiet, weary understanding. I grappled with the lingering sadness, the ghost of the life I once had, a young man's dream dissolved into bitter reality. But with it, I also found a renewed sense of self-respect. I hadn't compromised my values. I had stood my ground. I learned that some wounds never fully close, but they can scar over, allowing new growth to take root, making you stronger, if not softer. The moral lesson resonated, not as a thunderclap, but as a quiet, persistent hum. Actions have consequences, and sometimes, the price paid is far greater than the fleeting thrill. I walked out of Gus's bar one evening, the cool Midwestern air a quiet comfort against my face. I took a deep breath, the scent of damp earth and distant wood smoke filling my lungs. I looked forward, not back, to a life now solely my own. I understood that even in the quietest corners of America, betrayal can echo louder than any shout. And the payment for it is exacted in ways no one truly expects. The divorce concluded, a quiet finality to a relationship, long since fractured. Clara left town, a whisper of a departure, and I occasionally heard news of her, always vague, always implying a loneliness that rivaled my own. Darren, too, disappeared from the local scene, his reputation in tatters. A lesson for anyone considering a clandestine affair in a small community. I stayed in my apartment on the edge of town, finding a new rhythm to life. The evenings at Gus's were fewer now, the quiet company a comfort rather than a necessity. The anger had faded, replaced by a dull ache, a permanent scar. Clara had sought freedom and exploration, and she found it, but at a cost that consumed her. It was a bleak irony, a reminder that some paths, though seemingly liberating, lead only to isolation. I still carried the ghost of our life together, a silent weight. But I also carried a renewed sense of self. The betrayal had carved a hollow space, but it also forced me to find strength I didn't know I possessed. The wounds never truly vanished, but they hardened, allowing me to build anew. Actions, I learned, have consequences, and the price of those choices can echo through a lifetime, louder and longer than any fleeting moment of desire.